Queen Thessara of the Valyrian Dominion entered the grand reception hall with the practiced composure of someone who had ruled for 12 years and conducted hundreds of these diplomatic sessions. The chamber was filled with petitioners, representatives, officers presenting reports, the usual complex web of obligation and advantage that defined interstellar politics. Her daughter, Princess Kira, walked beside her. 8 years old now, old enough to begin learning statecraft through observation. Thessara had been training her carefully, teaching her to maintain royal composure, to watch without reacting, to understand the subtle dynamics of power and obligation. Today's agenda included a small coalition delegation seeking to establish preliminary trade relations. Minor business, really. The humans were relative newcomers to the galactic stage, and while their growing influence couldn't be ignored, this particular meeting was more about establishing contact than negotiating anything substantial. Thessara began processing the formal greetings with half her attention, her mind already moving ahead to more complex matters later in the session. The coalition ambassador was presenting credentials, introducing his delegation with the usual diplomatic pleasantries. Then Kira made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that cut through Thessara's diplomatic autopilot like a blade. She glanced down at her daughter and felt her own composure crack. Kira had gone absolutely rigid, staring at someone in the coalition delegation, with an expression of shocked recognition and overwhelming emotion that no 8-year-old could possibly fake or control. "Mom," Kira said, her voice small and breaking protocol entirely by speaking during formal proceedings. Her hand gripped Thessara's with sudden desperate strength. "Mom, he's here. The one who saved me is here." Thessara's mind went blank with shock. She followed her daughter's gaze to a human man standing toward the back of the coalition delegation. Unremarkable by human standards, mid-30s perhaps, average height, wearing simple civilian clothing that marked him as support staff rather than primary diplomat. But Kira was staring at him like she'd seen a ghost, and the human looked equally shocked, his eyes wide as he clearly recognized the princess. Thessara's mind raced backward 4 years to an incident she preferred not to remember. Kira had been 4 years old, traveling with a small security detail through Concord Station for a routine diplomatic visit. There had been an attack of terrorists targeting Valyrian interests, explosives that killed 3 of her guards and trapped Kira in a collapsing section of the station. Thessara had been on the other side of the complex when it happened, coordinating rescue efforts while absolutely terrified that she would lose her daughter the same way she'd lost her husband 2 years prior. The rescue report had been sparse. Multiple civilians assisted in evacuation. One unidentified human had reportedly pulled Kira from debris moments before a secondary collapse would have killed her. By the time Thessara reached the scene, Kira was with medics and the mysterious rescuer had vanished, disappeared into the chaos of mass evacuation before anyone could get his name. Thessara had tried desperately to identify him afterward. She'd wanted to thank him properly, to offer reward and formal recognition. But the station's security footage had been corrupted by the explosions, and witness accounts were confused and contradictory. The human who'd saved her daughter had disappeared without providing a name or accepting recognition. She'd eventually accepted that she would never find him, carrying the weight of an unpaid debt for 4 years, one of the few obligations in her reign that remained unresolved. And now he was standing in her reception hall, apparently part of a coalition delegation, looking as shocked as she felt. "You," Thessara said, abandoning all diplomatic protocol, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent hall. "You're the one who saved my daughter." The human looked profoundly uncomfortable with the sudden attention of every person in the chamber. "Your Majesty, yes. I was on Concord Station during the attack. I helped with evacuation efforts." "You pulled my daughter from collapsing debris moments before it would have killed her," Thessara said, her voice carrying emotion she rarely showed in public settings. "My guards told me. A human man who refused to leave her behind, who stayed in a collapsing structure to free her from wreckage, who carried her to safety and then disappeared before we could properly thank him. I was just doing what anyone would do, the human said quietly. There were many people helping that day. But you were the one who saved Kira specifically. You were the one who stayed when it was dangerous. You were the one who vanished before I could repay that debt. Thesara felt 4 years of carried obligation settling on her with renewed weight. Among the Valyrian debts, especially life debts involving the royal family, were sacred matters bound by honor and ancient law. The entire court had fallen silent, watching this deviation from diplomatic protocol with fascination. Thesara made a decision. What is your name? Daniel Cross, Your Majesty. I'm a cultural liaison with the Coalition Diplomatic Corps. Why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you accept recognition for saving the crown princess? Daniel looked deeply uncomfortable. Your Majesty, it was chaos. I helped where I could, like many others. By the time things stabilized, you were with your daughter and I didn't want to intrude on private family moment. And honestly, I didn't expect recognition. I was just helping someone who needed help. You saved my daughter's life, Thesara said, and her voice carried the weight of 4 years of unresolved obligation. Among the Valyrian, that creates a life debt, one that I have been unable to repay because I couldn't identify you. But now you're here, and that changes everything. She turned to her senior advisor. Clear the hall immediately. This is no longer a routine diplomatic session. The command sent ripples of surprise through the assembled dignitaries, but they began filing out promptly. When the queen commanded in that tone, you obeyed without question. Within minutes, only essential palace staff, the small coalition delegation, Thesara, Daniel, and Kira remained in the vast hall. Kira had moved closer to Daniel during the commotion, and now she stood looking up at him with the kind of devotion that only children who remember being saved can express. You carried me, she said quietly. I remember. The building was falling down and I was so scared, and you told me it would be okay. You stayed with me even when it was dangerous and things were exploding. You were very brave, Daniel told her gently, kneeling to her level. You stayed calm even though you were frightened. That helped me work faster. I remember your voice, Kira said, tears forming in her eyes. You kept talking to me while you were moving the metal and concrete. You told me about Earth, about your home, about oceans and forests, to distract me from being scared. I still remember the stories. Thesara felt emotion threatening to overwhelm her legendary composure. This man had saved her daughter, the most precious thing in her existence, and then disappeared without accepting reward or even basic recognition. Among the Valyrian, such behavior was almost incomprehensible. You didn't save a royal life and then just vanish. Mr. Cross, Thesara said formally, among my people, life debts are sacred obligations. By saving my daughter, by saving my heir, the future of my lineage, the most important person in my existence, you placed me under a debt that I am honor-bound to repay. For 4 years I have carried this obligation, unable to fulfill it because I couldn't identify you. Now that I can, the debt must be acknowledged and properly addressed. Daniel stood, looking genuinely uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. Your Majesty, I don't expect or want repayment. I helped Princess Kira because she needed help. That's not something that requires reward. Perhaps not in human culture, Thesara acknowledged. But in Valyrian culture, life debts are binding obligations. They're not optional based on the rescuer's preference. You saved my daughter. That creates a debt that I cannot simply dismiss, because you find recognition uncomfortable. She straightened, projecting the full authority of her position. You saved the crown princess at risk to your own life. That gives you claim on royal favor, significant claim by our law and tradition, and that claim must be properly settled. The coalition ambassador stepped forward cautiously. Your Majesty, Mr. Cross is indeed part of our delegation. We had no idea about his connection to Princess Kira. If there's a cultural debt protocol that needs to be addressed, perhaps we can discuss appropriate. This isn't a diplomatic negotiation, Thessara interrupted. This is a personal debt of the highest order. Mr. Cross saved my child's life. By Valyrian law, that means he has the right to ask essentially anything within my power to grant. And refusing to exercise that right doesn't make the debt disappear. It just leaves it unresolved, which is intolerable. She turned her full attention back to Daniel. Do you understand what I'm saying? You have claim on a life debt from the crown. That's one of the most serious obligations in our culture. You can ask something of me, and if it's within my power, I am bound by honor to grant it. But Daniel clearly had no idea how to respond. Your Majesty, I genuinely don't know what to say. I didn't save Princess Kira expecting anything. The idea of asking for reward feels fundamentally wrong. But not reward, Thessara corrected firmly. Settlement of sacred debt, recognition of what you did and the obligation it created. This isn't payment for services. It's acknowledging that you gave my daughter her life when she would have died without your intervention. But Kira tugged on Daniel's hand. When had she taken his hand? Looking up at him with earnest intensity beyond her 8 years. You should ask for something, she said seriously. Mom has been looking for you for years. She wants to thank you properly. Please let her. And in that moment, looking at her daughter holding the hand of the man who'd saved her life, Thessara understood exactly how this debt needed to be settled. It would shock her court. It would require unprecedented action. But it was the only settlement that made sense, the only way to properly honor what this human had done, and the bond that already existed between him and Kira. She just had to figure out how to explain it in a way that Daniel would accept. The days following that disrupted diplomatic session were unlike anything Daniel Cross had experienced in his career. One moment he'd been support staff for a routine trade delegation. The next, he was the focal point of royal attention, subject to ancient laws of obligation he didn't fully understand. His quarters were moved from standard diplomatic housing to the palace's guest wing. He was assigned personal staff, Valyrian attendants who treated him with a deference that made him deeply uncomfortable. He was given formal recognition as the human who saved the crown princess, a title that followed him through every palace corridor. And he was summoned to private audiences with Queen Thessara with increasing frequency. You have to ask for something, Thessara told him during their third private meeting, in her personal study rather than the formal throne room. The debt cannot remain unresolved. It's not just personal preference, it's cultural law governing royal obligations. You saved my daughter. I owe you. That debt must be acknowledged and properly settled. Daniel sat across from her, acutely aware that he was having an informal conversation with a monarch who ruled 40 star systems. Your Majesty, I understand this is important in your culture, but I genuinely don't know what to ask for. I'm a cultural liaison with modest needs. I have a career I'm satisfied with, a life that works for me. What could I possibly ask for that would be appropriate to the situation? Anything, Thessara said firmly. Within my considerable power to grant. Land, wealth, title, position within the Dominion, favor for coalition interests, access to resources, whatever you want. Name it, and if I can provide it, I will. That's what life debt settlement means. That seems excessive for pulling someone out of rubble. My daughter would have died, Thessara said flatly, and Daniel heard the raw emotion beneath her controlled tone. The secondary collapse happened 17 seconds after you got her clear. The structural engineers confirmed it. If you'd been slower, if you prioritized your own safety, if you decided it was too dangerous to stay in that collapsing section, she would be dead. You saved her life at risk to your own. That's not pulling someone out of rubble. That's heroism that created sacred obligation. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I remember being terrified. The station was shaking, alarms were screaming, people were panicking. I heard a child crying from the collapsed section and I just couldn't leave. I couldn't walk away knowing someone was trapped, especially not a child. But you could have, Thesara said quietly. Most people did. The security footage we recovered shows dozens of people running past that section to reach evacuation points. You were one of 3 who went toward the danger instead of away from it. And you were the only one who stayed long enough to free Kira from the debris. The other 2 helped. The other 2 evacuated when the structure began its final collapse. You stayed 17 seconds longer, which was the difference between my daughter living and dying. I've watched the recovered footage repeatedly, Daniel. I know exactly what you did and how dangerous it was. The use of his first name caught Daniel's attention. Thesara had been using formal address since the revelation, maintaining royal distance. The shift suggested something had changed. Why does this matter so much? Daniel asked carefully. I understand the cultural debt component, but there's something else here, something more personal. Thesara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried vulnerability he hadn't heard before. I lost my husband when Kira was 2 years old. Assassination, a rival faction that wanted to destabilize the succession. She was too young to remember him clearly. Then, 2 years later, she almost died on Concord Station. For 4 years I've carried the knowledge that a stranger saved her when I couldn't reach her. That I owe someone I couldn't identify a debt I couldn't repay. That my daughter's life, the most important thing in my existence, was preserved by someone who vanished before I could even learn his name. She met his gaze directly. Finding you isn't just about cultural obligation. It's about finally being able to acknowledge what you did, about being able to thank you properly, about settling a debt that's been weighing on me for 4 years, because it represented my failure to protect my own child. You didn't fail, Daniel said firmly. You couldn't have anticipated a terrorist attack. You couldn't have been everywhere at once. And from what I understand, you coordinated the rescue efforts that saved hundreds of people. You didn't fail, you just couldn't be the one who reached Kira first. That's not the same thing. Maybe not logically, but as a mother the distinction matters less. Thesara paused. Have you spent time with Kira since the revelation? Some, Daniel admitted. She sought me out several times. We've talked, she's shown me the palace gardens. She asks questions about Earth and human culture. She's attached to you, Thesara said. Her attendants tell me she talks about you constantly. Asks when you'll visit next, wants to show you things, tells stories about what you said or did. She remembers you from when she was 4 years old. That incident is her earliest clear memory. You're not just the human who saved her. You're a foundational memory of safety and protection. Daniel felt uncomfortable with the weight of that. I don't want to complicate her life or yours, if my presence is creating attachment issues. It's not a problem, Thesara interrupted. It's actually something she needs, something I haven't been able to give her. She paused, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Kira lost her father when she was very young. She has me, but I'm queen. There's always formality, always protocol, always the weight of rule between us even in private moments. She's had caregivers and tutors and guards, but no one who's just present with her without agenda or obligation. And you think I'm providing that. I know you are. I've watched you with her. You're genuinely kind without seeking advantage. You listen when she talks. You treat her like a person rather than a princess. She trusts you completely, which is something she doesn't give easily. Thesara met his gaze. You saved her life once. In a different way, you're still helping her now. Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself integrated into palace life in ways he hadn't anticipated. He still had duties with the coalition delegation, though his role had shifted significantly given his unexpected status. But increasing amounts of his time were spent with Kira. It started with simple visits. Kira would find him in the palace library or gardens and ask if he had time to talk. Then it became more structured. She'd request his presence during her free periods, wanting to show him things or tell him about her day. The palace staff began treating it as routine. Princess Kira's time with Daniel Cross, the human who'd saved her life, and who she'd clearly adopted as an important figure. "Tell me about Earth," Kira said one afternoon as they sat in the palace gardens watching the fountain displays. "You told me stories about oceans when you were rescuing me. I still remember them, but I want to know more." "Earth has massive oceans covering most of the planet," Daniel explained. "Water so deep that we still haven't explored all of it. Creatures that live in depths we can barely reach with our technology. Coral reefs that create entire ecosystems. Beaches where the waves sound like," he paused, searching for the right comparison, "like the whole planet breathing." "I want to see that someday," Kira said wistfully. "Visit Earth, see the oceans, understand where you come from." "Maybe you will," Daniel said. "Diplomatic exchanges work both ways. When you're older, when you're taking on more official responsibilities, visiting Earth could be part of that." "Will you show me? When I visit, will you take me to see the oceans you told me about?" "If I can, yes. I'd be honored to show you Earth." Kira was quiet for a moment, then asked in a smaller voice, "Will you stay? After your delegation's work is finished? Or will you go back to Earth and I won't see you again?" Daniel felt the weight of that question. "I don't know yet, Kira. I have responsibilities with the coalition. But I promise I won't just disappear without saying goodbye. Not like last time." "Last time you saved my life and then vanished," Kira said, and there was old hurt in her voice despite her young age. "I remember asking about you afterward, wanting to thank you, and no one could tell me who you were or where you'd gone. It felt like you were a dream I'd imagined." "I'm sorry," Daniel said sincerely. "I should have made sure you knew I was real, that you were safe. I didn't think about how it would feel from your perspective, being rescued by someone who then disappeared." "You're here now," Kira said. "That matters. But I don't want you to disappear again." Daniel didn't know how to respond to that without making promises he might not be able to keep. 6 weeks after the revelation, Thessara summoned Daniel to a formal audience. Not a private conversation, but an official proceeding with court witnesses and documentation. He entered the throne room to find Thessara seated in full formal regalia, her senior advisors present, and an air of ceremonial gravity that made him nervous. "Daniel Cross," Thessara began formally, "for 4 years I have carried the weight of unpaid life debt. You saved my daughter's life at risk to your own, and then vanished before that debt could be acknowledged or settled. Now that you've been identified, the debt must be resolved according to Valyrian law and tradition." "Your Majesty, I've explained that I don't expect." "I know what you've told me," Thessara interrupted. "That you want nothing, that you expect no reward, that you're uncomfortable with recognition. I've heard you. But the debt exists regardless of your comfort with it. So I'm making a decision that settles this according to Valyrian tradition while respecting what I've learned about you over these weeks." She paused, and Daniel saw something in her expression that suggested this was significant. "I'm offering you something I've never offered anyone. Something that will shock my court and probably complicate both our lives considerably. But it's the settlement that makes sense given the magnitude of the debt, and what I've observed about who you are and what my adoption." Daniel felt like the floor had just shifted beneath him. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I don't understand how that settles a life debt." "In Valyrian culture," Thessara explained, her voice carrying formal authority but also something more personal beneath it, "the highest possible honor for saving a child's life is to be made formally responsible for protecting that life going forward. You saved Kira once, at great personal risk. By adopting you as her bonded guardian, I'm acknowledging that you have earned the right and assumed the responsibility to continue protecting her. It's not symbolic. You would have legal authority to act in her interests, formal standing within the royal house, and permanent place in our family structure." Daniel struggled to process this. "But I'm human, I'm not Valyrian. How does adoption even work across species?" "The bonded guardian relationship isn't biological," Thessara said. "It's legal and emotional. You would be Kira's guardian in every way except genetic. Her protector, her advocate, her family. And mine as well by extension, since Valyrian family structures are interconnected. You would be part of the royal house, not as ornamental addition, but as someone with genuine authority and responsibility regarding Kira's welfare. The senior advisors standing witness looked varying degrees of shocked. Clearly, this was not something Thessara had discussed with them beforehand. I don't understand why you'd offer this, Daniel said carefully. Surely there are less radical ways to settle a debt: reward, recognition, formal honor. None of which address the actual situation, Thessara interrupted. You saved my daughter's life. Among the Valyrian, that creates a bond that can't be dismissed with simple material reward. The debt is so significant that the only appropriate settlement is to formalize the relationship that already exists. She glanced at Kira, who stood nearby watching with wide eyes. My daughter has formed a profound attachment to you. She trusts you completely. She talks about you constantly and has essentially adopted you in her own heart already. Formalizing that bond through legal adoption recognizes reality, while settling the life debt through the highest possible honor our culture can grant. What would this mean practically? Daniel asked, his mind spinning through implications. You would live in the palace as Kira's bonded guardian. You would have authority to make decisions regarding her welfare, education, security. You would be consulted on matters affecting her. You would be part of the royal family with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, which is considerable. You would have formal protection under royal law, standing to advocate for her interests, and permanent place in the succession structure. Thessara paused. And you would have a home here, a place, a purpose, a family, if you choose to accept. And if I refuse, then the debt remains unresolved, which is intolerable in Valyrian culture, Thessara said honestly. But I cannot and will not force you to accept family bonds. This only works if you genuinely want it. If you're willing to take on the responsibility of being Kira's guardian not from obligation, but from real commitment to her well-being. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, trying to think through the enormity of what was being offered. Can I speak with Princess Kira before making a decision? Of course. Thessara gestured, and Kira moved forward hesitantly, looking between them with an expression that mixed hope and fear. Daniel knelt to her level, meeting her eyes directly. Kira, your mother has offered to make me your bonded guardian. That would mean I'd stay here in the palace as part of your family. I'd be responsible for helping to protect you and advocate for you and spend time with you. Do you understand what that means? It means you'd stay. Kira asked, her voice small. You wouldn't go back to Earth, you'd be here. Yes, I'd stay. I'd be part of your life permanently, not just visiting. Like a parent, Kira's voice was barely a whisper, something like that, yes. I wouldn't replace your mother. She'd still be your mother and your queen. But I'd be your guardian, someone who's responsible for your well-being and who you could come to when you need help or support or just someone to talk to. Tears formed in Kira's eyes. I want that. I want you to stay. You're the one who saved me and you're kind and you tell good stories and I feel safe when you're here. Please stay. Daniel felt something in his chest crack open. This child, this 8-year-old princess who remembered him from the worst day of her young life, was asking him to be part of her family with absolute sincerity. He looked up at Thessara. Your Majesty, if you're genuinely offering this, if it's truly what you believe is appropriate settlement for the life debt, then I accept. I'd be honored to be Princess Kira's bonded guardian and part of your family. The formal adoption process took weeks. Legal documentation had to be prepared establishing Daniel's status within the royal house. Public announcements were made, carefully worded to explain the unprecedented step of adopting a human as bonded guardian, while emphasizing the cultural significance of life debt settlement. The Valyrian court reacted with shock that gradually shifted to acceptance. Some traditionalists objected to such an unconventional arrangement, but the Queen's word was law, and it was hard to argue against honoring someone who'd saved the Crown Princess's life. The coalition was initially bemused, but ultimately supportive. Having one of their cultural liaisons adopted into Valyrian royalty actually strengthened diplomatic ties in unexpected ways. Daniel's official status shifted. He was still nominally coalition personnel, but his primary role was now as Kira's guardian. Daniel moved into palace quarters adjacent to Kira's, a suite of rooms that was far more luxurious than anything he'd ever imagined living in. He was assigned staff who treated him with the deference due to a member of the royal house, which he found deeply uncomfortable but gradually learned to navigate. But the most significant change was in his relationship with Kira. She'd been attached to him before the adoption. Afterward, she blossomed in ways that made Daniel realize how much she'd been needing exactly this kind of relationship. She came to him with problems she didn't feel comfortable bringing to her mother. Small things, mostly, difficulties with tutors, social complications with other young nobility, fears and worries that seemed trivial but loomed large in her 8-year-old perspective. "I don't understand the mathematics lesson," she admitted one evening, looking frustrated and close to tears. "My tutor explains it, but it doesn't make sense and I feel stupid." "You're not stupid," Daniel said firmly. "Sometimes things just don't click right away. Can you show me what you're working on?" They spent an hour going over the mathematical concepts, Daniel finding different ways to explain, until something finally resonated, and Kira's face lit up with understanding. "You're good at teaching," she said. "You don't make me feel dumb for not understanding right away." "That's because not understanding something immediately doesn't mean you're dumb. It means you're learning, which is literally the point." He became part of her daily routine, morning meals together, discussing her schedule for the day. Evenings in the library or gardens, talking about whatever was on her mind. Regular excursions to parts of the palace or the surrounding grounds, exploring together. "I never had this before," Kira told him one day as they walked through the palace's botanical gardens. "Someone who's just here. Not because it's their job or duty, but because they want to be. Mom loves me, but she's queen. There's always something more important she has to do. The staff are kind, but they're staff. You're different." "How am I different?" "You're family," Kira said simply. "You chose to be family, that makes it different." Thessara watched this developing relationship with visible relief and gratitude. 6 months after the adoption was formalized, she and Daniel had a private conversation in the gardens, while Kira played nearby with some of the palace children. "Do you regret it?" Thessara asked. "Accepting the adoption, binding yourself to our family and all the complications that entails." "Not for a single moment," Daniel said honestly. "I saved Kira 4 years ago because it was the right thing to do. Now I get to continue being part of her life in ways I never imagined. That's not something to regret, that's something to be grateful for." "You've given me something I couldn't provide on my own," Thessara said quietly. "Kira is happier, more confident, more open than I've seen her since her father died. She has someone who's present with her without the weight of royal obligation creating distance. That's invaluable." "She's an extraordinary child," Daniel said, watching Kira laugh with the other children. "Smart, kind, brave. Being her guardian isn't a burden, it's a privilege." "You gave me my daughter twice," Thessara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Once by pulling her from that debris 4 years ago. Again by accepting this bond and becoming the guardian she needed. The life debt is formally settled, but the gratitude will never fade." "I didn't do it for gratitude," Daniel said. "I did it because Kira needed someone and I could be that person, and because you offered something I didn't know I was missing, a family, a home, a place to truly belong. That's worth more than any debt settlement." "You have a family now," Thessara said. "For as long as you want it. You're part of our house, Daniel. That's not just legal status, it's reality. You're Kira's guardian and what's the human term? Brother-in-law, family member." Family works, Daniel said. We don't need to complicate it with specific titles. We're family, that's enough. 2 years after the adoption, Daniel had settled fully into his role as Kira's bonded guardian. What had seemed impossibly strange initially now felt natural. Being part of a royal household, navigating Valyrian court politics, raising a princess who was now 10 years old and growing into a remarkable young woman. But the true test of their bond came when Kira faced her first real crisis as a member of the royal family. A diplomatic incident on a border world threatened to escalate into armed conflict. Thessara was managing the crisis from the capital, but protocol required a royal presence on site to demonstrate the crown's commitment to peaceful resolution. Normally, that would be Thessara herself, but the situation was too volatile. Sending the queen would be seen as either weakness or preparation for war, depending on interpretation. The decision was made to send Kira instead, accompanied by experienced diplomats and substantial security. At 10 years old, she was young for such responsibility, but the symbolism was perfect. Sending the crown princess demonstrated seriousness without the implications of the queen's presence. Daniel objected immediately when Thessara told him the plan. She's 10 years old. You're sending her into a potential conflict zone. That's unacceptable. She'll be heavily guarded, Thessara said, and the diplomatic team knows their work. Her presence is symbolic. She won't be negotiating directly. Symbolic presence in a conflict zone is still presence in a conflict zone, Daniel said flatly. I don't care about the symbolism. I care about Kira's safety. As her guardian, you have the right to object to decisions affecting her welfare, Thessara acknowledged. But as queen, I'm telling you this is necessary. The situation requires royal presence, and I cannot go myself without making things worse. Then send me with her, Daniel said. As her guardian, I have the right to accompany her, correct? Thessara was quiet for a moment. Yes. By law, the bonded guardian can accompany the ward on official duties. But Daniel, if something goes wrong, I'll do what I did 4 years ago on Concord Station, Daniel interrupted. Whatever's necessary to keep her safe, that's what guardians do. The mission to the border world was tense from the beginning. Kira was nervous but determined, wearing her formal regalia and maintaining royal composure despite being a child in a situation that would challenge adults. Daniel stayed close, not as obvious bodyguard. There were professionals for that, but as steady presence she could rely on. The diplomatic sessions were grueling. Kira had to sit through hours of negotiation she barely understood, maintaining perfect behavior while adult diplomats argued and postured. During breaks, she'd find Daniel, and some of the nervous energy would drain away. I hate this, she admitted during one break, in a secure room away from the formal proceedings. Everyone's angry and shouting, and I have to just sit there looking calm when I'm terrified something's going to go wrong. You're doing brilliantly, Daniel told her. Better than most adults would in your position. The diplomats told me you're helping. Your presence is reminding everyone what's at stake. They can't just see this as abstract political conflict when a child is sitting there watching them. Do you think Mom knew it would be this hard? Yes, but she also knew you could handle it, and she knew I'd be here to help you through it. The third day, things went catastrophically wrong. An extremist faction opposed to peaceful resolution attacked the diplomatic compound. Explosives, coordinated assault, the kind of violence designed to derail negotiations permanently by making diplomatic solutions impossible. Daniel's world narrowed to one priority: get Kira to safety. The security detail was professional and prepared, but the attack was coordinated and brutal. Daniel grabbed Kira the moment the first explosion hit, moving toward the pre-planned evacuation route even as alarms screamed and people panicked. Stay with me, he told Kira, his voice calm despite the chaos. Just like before, remember, I've got you, we're going to be fine. You said that last time, Kira said, her voice scared but controlled. On Concord Station. You said it would be okay. And it was okay. This will be too, I promise. They made it to the evacuation transport with the security detail providing cover. Daniel didn't relax until they were off-world, until Kira was confirmed safe, until the immediate danger was past. Afterward, in the secure facility where they'd been evacuated, Kira broke down in a way she couldn't during the crisis. She clung to Daniel and cried for the fear, for the violence, for how close they'd come to disaster. You stayed with me again, she said through tears. When the explosion started, everyone was running, but you came toward me. You kept your promise. Always, Daniel said, holding her. That's what family does. We stay with each other when things are dangerous. We protect each other, always. When they returned to the capital, Thessara met them in the private royal quarters, abandoning all formal protocol to embrace her daughter. Then she turned to Daniel with an expression that mixed gratitude and something that looked like guilt. I sent her into danger, Thessara said quietly after Kira had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from the trauma and relief. I made the political calculation that her presence was necessary, and I nearly lost her. Again. But you didn't lose her, Daniel said, because you sent me with her. Because you understood that the adoption wasn't just about settling a debt. It was about giving her someone who would protect her unconditionally, even when political necessity requires risk. You saved her twice now, Thessara said. 4 years ago and 3 days ago. How do I repay that? How do I acknowledge what you've done? You don't, Daniel said simply. That's not how family works. You don't repay people for protecting those they love. You just love them back. You trust them. You build a life together where everyone protects everyone else because that's what family means. He paused. You've given me a home, Thessara. A daughter to raise, a purpose beyond career, a family I never imagined having. You don't owe me anything. We're even. We're family. That's all that matters. Years passed. Kira grew into a remarkable young woman, shaped by her experiences and her relationship with both her mother and her guardian. She never forgot that she had 2 people who'd saved her life, her mother through leadership and rule, and Daniel through direct action and unconditional protection. The story of the human who was adopted into Valyrian royalty became legend, told as example of how debts of honor can create bonds deeper than blood, how family can be chosen rather than just inherited, how past mercy can reshape entire futures. But for Thessara, Daniel, and Kira, the story was simpler and more profound than legend suggested. It was the story of recognition, a queen recognizing the man who'd saved her daughter, a guardian recognizing that sometimes the greatest reward is being allowed to continue protecting someone you care about, a child recognizing that family is built not just through genetics, but through choices renewed daily. The queen who entered a room and heard her daughter's voice. Mom, the one who saved me is here. The moment past mercy resurfaced to reshape fate, power, and create bonds that transcended species, status, and everything that traditionally divided worlds. The guardian who saved a princess twice, once through immediate action, once through continued presence and unconditional protection. The family built not through blood but through choice, honor, gratitude, and love. That was the real story. That was the legacy. That was the moment the queen learned that some debts are best settled not through payment but through invitation, asking someone to become family rather than just accepting reward, and discovering that the man who saved her daughter deserved not just recognition but a home, forever.